Hello everyone, Nathaniel Gavronsky here, and I'm in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the history of the Virginia Capitol and the legislature body that uses this building. Now, this also goes back until to May of 1607, when the first settlement of Jamestown is founded. Now, this is the first successful British settlement, and the people who settled this, primarily John Smith and Christopher Newport, they travel the James River up and down. They actually go to what they call the headwaters, which is where as far navigable as a ship could go. And ironically enough, that ends up the headwaters ends up becoming the city of Richmond. That's where these rapids are, and these rapids are as far up the river that a ship can go. And so they survey the whole James River. And the other side of the peninsula is the York River. Anyway, they formed the settlement of Jamestown, and Jamestown is basically the city where they govern themselves. Now, in 1619, on July 30th, the very first legislative body, called the House of Burgesses, meets in the church there. And that church, it's still there. Part of it is still there. They added on some things to it since it was originally built. A tower was added on to it. That tower actually still stands. If you watch my video on Jamestown, you get to see a little bit more in detail about this church and some of the buildings that were there. Now, the capital was Jamestown. This is where the House of Burgesses would meet, in Jamestown, with the royal governors. And the royal governors and the House of Burgesses, they got along. We were all British subjects. They all agreed this is what they were going to be doing. And the settlement, the Powhatan Indians, they had a good relationship with them. They did a lot of trading with them. It wasn't all peaceful, but for the most part, they actually had really good relations. They did intermarry. Pocahontas was married in Jamestown. I said to watch the video in Jamestown. There's a lot of interesting stuff about Jamestown's time as capital of Virginia. Now, as the population grew and a lot of the indentured servants had paid off their servitude, they were moving out of the settlement and they were wanting more land for themselves, and they were coming into the Native Americans, which the royal governor didn't really want to move or have removed because they were in good relations. Nathaniel Bacon, though, decided that it was time for them to actually give these former indentured servants more land. They needed more land. There wasn't enough for them to actually farm and be financially, viable. And so, even though that the royal governor Berkeley tried to work with him to, garner peace with the Indians and to have land that they could track, Bacon wasn't having it, and he actually marched into Jamestown in 1676 with 600 men and burnt down the entire community, including the building they were using for a capital. Now, it was kind of discussed, well, maybe we should go ahead and move the capital further inward. I mean, there's other areas where not being really used that we actually have control over as, the Virginia colony. Maybe we should move it, but they reluctantly rebuilt in Jamestown again. However, in 1698, the building burnt again. This time not because of rebellion, just because the buildings kept burning down in Jamestown. This was the last straw. 1699, they decided they were moving the capital from Jamestown into what they would call Williamsburg. Now, the ground for breaking for the Williamsburg capital took place in 1701 through 1705. 1704, the legislative body moved into it. One side was the House of Burgesses, the other side was the royal governor and the council. Now, the council could override and veto anything the legislature did, but they let the colonists think they had a voice. Essentially, that's what it was. But for things that the governor and the council agreed on to, the legislator wanted to do it, they supported it. Now, this building would serve up until 1747, when it would unfortunately burn down. Then they built another one, and the new legislature took its seats in 1753. Now, it was this building that George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Monroe, and Patrick Henry, they got their start in the House of Burgesses in this building, the building that was built and used in Williamsburg after 1753. However, Jefferson hated Williamsburg. It wasn't all that protective. He was the governor during, towards the end of the Revolutionary War. He really thought they needed to make changes. And also about this time, the Revolutionary War, the House of Burgesses changed its name to the House of Delegates. A couple of interesting things about Virginia during the Revolutionary War period is that Patrick Henry actually gave his speech about "Give me liberty or give me death" in Old St. John's Church here in Richmond in the oldest part of Richmond. Richmond was founded in 1733 to 1737 by a guy by Colonel William Byrd II. He inherited land by his father, and he plotted this land, and they incorporated it into a town in 1842. Now, they had this hearing in Richmond at this church, which is, again, the oldest church in Virginia and the oldest part of Richmond. And this would have been March 23rd of 1775, when Patrick Henry gave his speech about "Give me liberty or give me death." This was the call for arms. Massachusetts had actually already started this rebellion, but Virginia was the heavyweight. Virginia was the determining factor, because Virginia was the most populated, most wealthy state. So they needed to garner up the arms, and they decided that they were going to start arming Virginia. And this is when you start seeing what was going on up in Massachusetts, with the British coming in, taking all the gunpowder and taking all the ammunition, all the bullets away. It started happening here in Virginia too. And so that led to the Congress here in Virginia, the legislature in Virginia, which was banned, by the way, by the royal governor, especially that whole March 23rd, 75 meeting. That's why it happened in Richmond and not Williamsburg. They decided that on July 29th of 1776, a few days before the Declaration of Independence was ratified in Philadelphia, Virginia declared its independence from Great Britain. And that was actually they were the first to declare their independence, Virginia, over the rest of the colonies, on July 29th of 76. So now we're going through the process of the Revolutionary War, and you have the British coming in, and of course they're the process of actually moving the capital during the Revolutionary War period. And when they get in, when the British come up through here, there's nothing, there's no governor, there's no government, they're all scattered because they're in the process of moving, because Jefferson hated Williamsburg and he hated living in the governor's palace there, that they decided, well, Richmond is a good community, the British ships can't get up here, let's move it up to Richmond. And so they moved up to Richmond, and about 82, 83. The Yorktown had already fallen at this point. Cornwallis had surrendered, but the war wasn't officially over until September of '83. So they settle up here in Richmond. They meet in local areas that they rent. But this building here, they started construction on it on August 18th of 1885. Now, here's the really interesting thing about this building behind me, is that it's built on top of what they call an English basement, which is just a big platform that the building sits on. They laid the cornerstone for this, started building that before they even knew what the building was going to look like. Now, they was just assumed that it was going to be built like every other British type of architectural building here in the North America. But Thomas Jefferson, who is accredited as being the master architect of this building, had nothing to do with it. Absolutely not. He was a classically trained architect. He loved the classics, and so he looked to France. And he looked, to Roman temples. And there's a temple in Nimes, France, that dates back to the 6th, 7th AD, 6, 7 AD, as the temple was built to heirs of Augustus Caesar. And it's called the Maison Carrée. And it is, again, in Nimes. It still exists today. It survived all the Middle Ages, even though it had some, remodeling done, because, it's pagan or not to Christianity. It had been since reconverted back to its former glory during the Roman Empire. This building still existed. It had these giant columns that are all along three sides of this building. And that's what he wanted. Now, these had not been done before in the New World. None of the buildings, no government building in the New World had columns. These columns are actually made out of local trees here, pine, I believe. They are the original columns from the building. Now, they started building this in '85. The legislature took its seat in 1792. George Washington is the president when this building is completed. Now, Jefferson has actually been in France working as basically the ambassador of the United States to France. He was there during the Bastille Day. He comes back, and then there's a statue inside this building of George Washington. And the statue wasn't completed when Jefferson was getting ready to come back to the United States. And Jefferson asked the sculptor, like, so why isn't this thing being built? And the sculptor's like, well, I'll get right to it as soon as you guys pay me. The sculptor had not been paid for his work. And so Jefferson negotiated a payment plan. They bought it on credit to get this statue done of George Washington. Now, here's the thing about this statue of George Washington, guys. This thing is the only one in the world that is made by him, by artisans actually meeting him directly, measuring him. So here's the thing. They went to so they came here for a couple of weeks from France. And the marble had to be out of Italian marble, the same type of marble that Michelangelo did the David out of. It's the same type of marble. They came down here to Mount Vernon. They met Washington. They followed Washington around his farm. They drew pictures of him. They sketched him. And then they decided, you know what? We need to take measurements of absolutely every square inch of this guy's body. So they dressed him up in his war uniform. Initially, they wanted togas. Washington's like, nope, no togas. Not happening with togas. I am not from Rome, not from Greek, not doing that. He overruled them. In his military uniform, had him lay out on the kitchen table, and they measured every finger, every fingernail, everything, the buttons, the jacket, the pants, the seams, everything about Washington. They measured him on his kitchen table. They go back to France, and they finally, because he got paid, they make this sculpture. Now, one of the things they did when they had Washington on the table is they put turkey quills up his nose, because they're hollow, so you can breathe out of them. And then they did a life mask. They put a plaster Paris over his face and created a life mask of Washington. And then from that life mask, they were able to actually mold several molds of what his face actually looked like, along with his hair and everything. And it's from this life mask that the face in this building is actually done from. Now, this statue was put in place in Richmond, Virginia, in 1796. Washington doesn't die until 1799, but we're not entirely for sure if Washington ever saw this statue. We do know that Lafayette, who came here in the early 1800s, saw it, said, this is absolutely, this is George Washington. I can see him walking down off that pedestal exactly now as the live man. It is so much him. But it is, the Washington statue was in the rotunda, which Jefferson never called it a rotunda. Jefferson called it the conference room. This is where the legislators would have their meeting room. This is where they would conjure up and caucus and discuss matters of state. But it's a big round room, and there actually is a dome inside. You can't see it from the outside, but inside there's a rotunda, and there's a dome inside that you can't see from the outside. It's naturally lit from the outside. So that's the kind of the building up into the Revolution and shortly after the Revolution. Now we're getting up into the Civil War. Now, Richmond had the largest steel mill in all of the Confederacy. That's why the capital was moved to Richmond. Now, during the Civil War, this building was used not only as the legislative building for the Virginia State House, the Virginia State government, which would meet for 40 to 60 days at the beginning of each year, it also housed the Confederate government. Now, why it was housing the Confederate government, they would basically just kind of like share the space. This was used by both the Virginia state and the Confederacy. Now, when Richmond starts to fall, we get Lee sends signal, hey, we can't defend the capital here. It's going to leave. We're abandoning. So they abandoned Richmond. A couple of things. John Brown's carpet bag, which had some of his papers and such things that weren't even published yet, someone hid them in the building, and they have never been found at all. I'm guessing, my personal opinion, someone probably found them and thought, ooh, nice carpet bag, and the papers, well, I can't read, so they were toilet paper. That's my honest opinion, but I don't know from history. But they never did officially find John Brown's carpet bag. But the building was spared from bombing and from being destroyed. In fact, Abraham Lincoln came to Richmond in April and toured this building along with the Confederate White House about a week or so before he was assassinated. The building was, under occupation by the federal government. They had a federal governor. They had a federal governor. They had the legislature. It was all kind of the old carpetbaggers from the north came down, and they ran the southern states for a period of time, from 1865 till roughly like 1870. As Reconstruction was kind of ending. But here's the problem: so we were still under, Virginia was still under the rule of the federal government. So the governor was still a carpetbagger governor, meaning he was under federal occupation. But the city of Richmond itself wanted to elect its own mayor and its own city council. They wanted to do these things. And there was a court hearing that was taking place on April 27th, 1870. Now, they were having this meeting in the court chambers, which were sitting above the House of Delegates at the time. Now, so many people were piling into this courtroom to discuss what was going to happen and who was going to actually be allowed to be the mayor of Richmond. The weight in the gallery gave through, and it fell onto the floor, into the floor of the courtroom. That courtroom floor then gave through again, and then people fell onto the floor of the delegates chamber, or then the gallery within the delegates chamber, and over 300 people were killed or injured. Among the dead were both the mayoral candidates. Patrick Henry's grandson was killed. Several former and current state legislators were killed, along with a couple of former judges. A couple of the old veterans from the war were here in attendance. They were maimed or killed. It was over 300 people that were killed or injured. Some of them were so badly injured that they had to bring them out on the portico. There's these stairs right here because they had to have their families help identify them. That's how bad it was. This was a really horrific event. Both candidates for the mayor were killed, and I wasn't really find out exactly what happened, but I'm guessing they waited for, they had to find new candidates to run, so this was this mute point after this tragedy. But eventually it does come back to complete, independent Virginia rule, and the governors, they take back over the ownership of the building, and the legislature takes over the building. The governor's mansion is just on the other side of this building. It's like in the same little fenced-in area, and that's the oldest governor's mansion in continuous use. It's a very beautiful building inside. It's been fun staying in Virginia in the building, but the Capitol building up until 1900, nothing changes. But they decide that the building is getting too small for the current government, so they decide they need to add these wings, and the wings were added between 1904 and 1906. Once the wings were created, the House and the Senate chamber move into their House delegates, and the Senate move into their respective chambers, and then the old part of the building just kind of reverts to a museum. The House chamber, the old delegates chamber, is basically like a statuary room. They still have chairs and desks and stuff there. The original speaker's chair has been moved from Richmond to the reproduction building in Williamsburg. And again, you can watch my video in Williamsburg, because like that building, once they left it burnt down. See, they left it in 81, it burnt down in 83, and then only the foundation was there until 1932 when they did a reproduction of it. But the original speaker's chair is actually back in Williamsburg. But they build these two wings in 1904 and 1906. They convert the building to a museum, the old Senate chamber, which originally was the Supreme Court room. They put some walls up, they make a Senate chamber. This was done before the Civil War. They convert it to like a little meeting room where people can watch and look, and they can have conferences in it during session. The old House chamber is a statue where there's statues of different people in Virginia history. And then the rotunda in the middle has the statue of George Washington, along with statues of all the Virginia-born presidents, and a portrait and a bust of Lafayette. And there's a lot of paintings of governors and speakers of the House, and that's essentially the building. And then in 2003, they decided that in front of this building here, they want to actually put a new visitor center. And these stairs were all put in around 1904 1904, 1906. But underneath the stairs, they actually now have a visitor center that because that was thought of in 2003. They started in 2004, and in 2023, as this video is being made, they're actually renovating the space again. So we'll see what happens. There's a couple of monuments here. There's a bell tower, which is just over here, that is ceremoniously rung during when session comes in and out. At other specific holidays. There's statues of a bunch of famous women from Virginia history. There's a big statue of Washington on his horse, along with some other Revolutionary War people. There's some civil rights leaders monuments over here, which is actually really, really cool. There's a fountain. Every single house and every single building has the same looking fountain in Richmond. I don't know if it's exactly the same looking fountain. All of them have the exact same fountain, same dimension, same everything. So